For many in the NHL playoffs, the action is at a fever pitch. Thrills and excitement in every period of play. Chaos and volatility around each corner. But there are those that have been out of commission for a month or so. Even in their off seasons and disappointment, they can get in on the action themselves. How, you may ask? With SeatGeek, the sponsor of this video, the eliminated teams can bask in playoff goodness. SeatGeek is an app that aggregates all tickets on the resale market to help those eager to access games get the best value. By sorting from red to green on a 1 to 10 scale, granting a view from where you'll be sitting, it helps, but there really isn't a bad seat in the house. Tickets are pricey for the playoffs, but using the code TREE in the link below will help you save $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek won't help you get on the ice, but it'll get you as close as possible. Those that miss the playoffs may need to take some notes on what caused them to miss. This team felt that it could be a playoff contender at the start of the season. Those ambitions died in about a month. A gigantic shit sandwich drizzled with moldy fungus and salmonella coulis. You wanted to bust through and make yourselves known. Well, your only accomplishment was giving up the most shots against in NHL history. What a burning trash fire. Regulars not taking that next step, prospects not developing, free agents flopping like fish. Is John Gibson being left to die, or has he just given up until he's cast free from this hell? I can't tell anymore. Nothing went right at all, even in the goddamn draft lottery where they repeated 2005 by missing out on the generational talent. The franchise is once again back to square one. Dallas Eakins being let go because he's trash? Edmonton sends the regards. No surprises here. The Grey Tank rolls on in a stadium they don't have first choice in. Surprisingly, it wasn't as bad as we thought it'd be. Mostly because the Coyotes gained some form before the end of the year and were simply a bad team. Everyone knows their plan is to accrue draft picks, load up for a few years down the line, and get their stadium approved in Tempe. It went through one major hurdle getting approved by City Council, and a public referendum will decide its fate shortly. Perhaps this works out better than the long, torturing Glendale, but time will tell. We've had a lot of good omens as of late. A minority owner getting arrested for domestic violence, the city of Phoenix suing Tempe for the project, and vice versa. As all things should be. In my hand, I have the results of the public referendum for the stadium in Tempe. The future of the franchise is at stake, and there were 3 proposals up for votes. By the power of the local populace, the proposed stadium in Tempe for the Coyotes has been resoundingly rejected on all 3 counts. Tempe is dead. The land they wanted to build on the Coyotes brand is just way too toxic to survive. This might have been their last chance to stay here. You're fucked. Yeah, sure, Buffalo didn't make the playoffs again. Yeah, the Sabres had plenty of opportunities to make it to the dance, yet fell flat on their face to barely miss. But if you're a fan of this team, you're feeling giddy. They have quite possibly the most intriguing situation in the NHL. The development that this team saw throughout their burgeoning core is the most optimistic I've been about them in a long time. Tage Thompson scoring everything in sight. Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power blossoming into stars on the back end. Jeff Skinner rebounding to form. Talent flowing down the wings. What killed them was defensive depth and goaltending, but the latter issue might not be one now. Devin Levi in his limited sample size looked like a stud. Even if UPL doesn't develop as advertised, goalie may go from weakness to strength. Step into the light, Sabres. The dark days might be over for you. They can take this offseason in a lot of different ways. Let's see what they do from here. Can you stop underachieving for 5 fucking minutes, Calgary? Jesus, I was out here thinking you did a good job in a precarious situation last offseason, and all you've done is form an argument to completely gut the franchise. In a world where they usually outshoot their opponents 45-22 with underlying puck possession dominance, Daryl Sutter and regressed goaltending forced them to lose the game 3-2 in overtime. Do you know how many OT and shootout losses they had? 17! 17! They win 3 of those, they make the playoffs, and we don't talk about this. But Sutter, was this a masterclass in sabotage or what? Jonathan Huberdeau spending swaths of the year on the right wing. Milan Lucic in the top 6. A shootout against Nashville with playoffs on the line. Send out Nick fucking Ritchie! You had Tyler Toffoli on the bench! Brad Treliving had enough of the bullshit of Sutter and fucked off when ownership refused to fire him. Only to have the players ready to mutiny and force them to fire Sutter 3 weeks later. Few teams have done less with more over the past decade than the Flames. It's infuriating. And the best part of all? A stadium deal has been resecured, which means you'll get more agony for years to come. It's still infinitely better than the team moving. Earlier in the year, Gary Bettman openly stated that there is no tanking in the NHL. I'd like to believe that he still thinks there are only 30 teams in the league, because in no right mind can you say the Blackhawks weren't tanking with a straight face. When I say they traded nearly everyone, they shipped off nearly everything they could. The Blackhawks have been stripped down to a bare-bones organization, and the only things left are the awful contract of Seth Jones and Jonathan Toews. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Kane and Toews are gone. Kane got traded at the deadline and Toews isn't coming back next year. How incredibly convenient that their departures plant the seed of a generational talent. Hockey Twitter was very cordial and understanding of the Blackhawks winning the lottery. An old era dies while a new one begins. Is there really any justice? Of course not. The red-headed stepchild of the NHL. No matter what Jan does to try and make herself noticed, Marsha always comes in and whacks her knees off with a crowbar. The analogy fits since nearly the entire goddamn team was injured at some point. Some for nearly the entire season. You got Johnny Hockey, and the cost is either in blood or severe underperformance. Cole Sillinger had a sophomore slump for the ages. Jakub Voracek suffered a career-ending injury and is now doomed to Arizona's LTIR. Elvis just hasn't been the same, and it's completely understandable as to why. Terrible goaltending and being forced to start a cast of AI-generated players by the end of the year are just a few of the miseries Columbus had to endure. And by losing the draft lottery to fall to third, it proves this team can't have nice things. I will say though, even for all the shit they were dealt, Brad Larson is a fucking terrible head coach. There are a few coaches as tactically deaf as that man, and I'm not shocked he was canned. Back to the minors with you. I should pay tribute to the Red Wings this season by being ridiculously inconsistent with my prose and diction. That's no exaggeration. Detroit was a different team nearly every night. Goaltending? Oh, good luck piecing together a few good games in a row. You're just waiting for this group to take that next step. There are morsels of what they could be in the future. Then they just drop a shitload of games in a row and regress back to 2024. They took some flack for waving the white flag and selling at the deadline, but I don't blame them. The team just isn't ready yet. That end-of-season collapse they had merely validated their actions. They did manage to lock up Dylan Larkin long-term at least, but when is the Yzer plan going to get out of neutral? The patience of the fan base is running thin. You need results. If things don't start evolving next season, will Red Wings fans start calling for Stevie's head? I've seen crazier things happen. This team threw everything in a magical cup run in 2021. And they're still paying the price for such an endeavor. Quite literally, I know. Throughout the season, the Habs lost almost 550 man games to the injury gods. Some of those were season-long LTIR stays, like Carey Price. But pretty much everyone with a dam was knocked out for long stretches of time. It did lead to the legend of Arbor Jacki and Raphael Harvey-Pinard, but this franchise is still adrift in a daze. Summoning all their power in 2021 has left them weak and decrepit. But they do have promising pieces coming through the system. And acquiring Pierre-Luc Dubois is all but guaranteed, but they need a goalie of the future. The heir to Carey Price hasn't emerged yet. They can flip it back in a few years if all goes well. Problem is, you still regret what was lost. At least you have the memories. Admission to fault is the first step towards fixing anything in life. It was obvious to anyone with a pair of eyes that the Preds were being carried by Juuse Saros. Sure, there were interesting pieces littered throughout the roster, but without Saros, this is a lottery team. To be fair, they still were, but that's more due to Nashville finally pulling the plug on the season. Trading off everything they could for surprisingly great returns. Hey, if someone's desperate enough to throw a haul for Tanner Jeannot, you don't even blink. The most hilarious thing is that they nearly made the playoffs regardless. They rattled off an impressive run without a huge chunk of their core, but came up just short to a Jets team that set itself on fire shortly thereafter. Despite the miss, Nashville's in an interesting situation. They've got some promise in the youth. They've acquired solid draft capital and a deep draft. Not to mention having Juuse Saros and Yaroslav Askarov between the pipes. Plus, long-awaited executive changes are being made. David Poile is retiring at the end of June, stepping back to an advisory role for the return of the Eggman. Barry Trotz as a GM. I'm interested to see how he does. Get ready, Nashville. A new chapter is beginning. This year just felt weird for the Sens. They felt to be on the brink of contention status, and then whenever they get the chance to thrive, they just fall apart. Something tended to sabotage them at the worst moment. It may have been injuries to key players, including newly acquired Jacob Chikrin. It may have been yet another year of severe goaltending issues. It may have been simply due to being a young team still trying to find themselves, but it's still frustrating. They have potential and pieces to form a nice core, however, they still need more. Maybe it'll come with their new owner. Melnick's daughters are cashing out and the suitors are lining up to stake a claim, including groups featuring Ryan Reynolds, Snoop Dogg, and The Weeknd as faces. Who will secure such a bounty? It'll probably cost over $1 billion to do. Pony up. Philly's executive branch really thought that injuries were the only thing holding them back from contention status. They are so damn delusional about their franchise that it's no wonder why they haven't done shit in their visionless approach. John Tortorella and Tony D'Angelo was supposed to work? Sure as hell didn't. Rasmus Ristolainen was supposed to live up to his contract? Not a damn chance. Chuck Fletcher making competent moves? Have you seen his resume? He'll shit his pants and do nothing at the deadline while leaving JVR out to rot. It's bad when the boys club of Philly has seen enough and tells you to pack your shit a week later. Locked into awful contracts and prospects that haven't panned out. A predictable disaster. Such a mess that they're starting to utter the dreaded hard R in press conferences. Rebuilding. And not the half-assed shit they've been doing. To lead a new era, former Flyer and Danny Briere as GM and former Flyer Keith Jones as team president. Yes, that Keith Jones. And for the record, Holmgren and Clark are still on the advisory board.
Oh boy, a slightly different shade of orange!
That'll turn the tide! This is why I was screaming for them to rebuild last offseason. I've often compared the Penguins' decline to the Red Wings, but that might be wrong. Detroit just went out slow and sad. Pittsburgh's going out in a blaze of hilarity. A supposed cup contender would be so damn inconsistent from game to game, even period to period. Playoff caliber goaltending to pure shithouse. Comebacks on the regular to blowing 2-3 goal leads on the regular. Pump out offensive firepower, then get shut down by Dylan goddamn Ferguson on emergency call-up. Ron Hextall really likes this team. So much so that he'll make them older, slower, and locked into shittier contracts. Fucker's a double agent for Philly. The core isn't what they once were, and the lack of depth around them was exposed regularly. Especially in the final 2 games of the year. Chicago and Columbus were openly tanking on massive losing skids, and Pittsburgh only had to win both games to get their asses kicked by Boston. Could they do it? Fuck no, they lost both. And as a result, Boston and Toronto should want them dead. They could do us a favor by giving no quarter to Ron Hextall, Brian Burke, or Chris Pryor. What a disaster. How do you squander perfectly healthy seasons from Crosby and Malkin? The good news is that Erik Karlsson's contract is no longer one of the biggest albatrosses in hockey. His rebound to form this season was inspiring to generations. The skill and instincts that made him a deadly weapon in Ottawa managed to return to him. A true asset to any team's Stanley Cup ambitions. Now, only if there was actual talent around him. Besides Timo Meier. By the way, he got traded to an up-and-comer. As the roster's currently constructed, Erik Karlsson on the Sharks is like a Formula One car on a go-kart track. With a lack of depth and goaltending on this roster, good luck with that. They tried to trade Karlsson at the deadline, but the price for his services was too steep. Now they try again in the offseason. His market should be hot. Hopefully he'll be set free. San Jose officially kicks off a tank the likes we haven't seen. Maybe this is the year they finally buy out Vlasic's deal. We can only dream. If you thought Pittsburgh was inconsistent, oh baby, just wait until you get down to the city with the Gateway Arch. It was all damn season. Win 3 in a row, lose 8 in a row, win 7 straight, piss away 8 of 10, win 4, then drop 4 of 5. That was all before January. Welcome to St. Louis Blues hockey, where Jordan Binnington was more interested in imitating Ron Hextall and everything besides actual goaltending. Who needs to stop pucks from getting in the net when you can deck players and carry more baggage than Lawrence Phillips? Only in St. Louis can they somehow remain in playoff contention until February as the head coach calls them out for playing without heart or passion. With what I saw when I caught them play, he wasn't wrong. It's why management sold off what they could at the deadline, including O'Reilly and Tarasenko. And they're in an interesting position. The Blues have 3 first-rounders to play with, and their core is still sturdy enough that they can slingshot back to contention with the right moves. Just do us all a favor. Staple Binnington's mouth shut. and replace the malfunctioning chip in his brain. Call this season a train wreck would be like calling the Titanic sinking a mere scrape. Good lord, teams have spent years accruing such awful PR en masse as the Canucks did. Vancouver's struggles were well known. Thatcher Demko suddenly being unable to make a save, one of the worst penalty kills in recent memory, and a lot of underachieving parts in the forward core. Major surgery is needed on the mistakes they made this past offseason, which includes Bruce Boudreau. Look, if you want to fire the guy, just fire him. Don't drag him out for weeks on end and use his raw emotions for social media clout. Finally cutting him loose was a mercy kill. You got your Rick Tocchet. And you can boast that bringing him in righted the ship, even though that was because Demko came back as peak Demko. Worse, they're still trying to double down on this bullshit by buying at the deadline and not shipping off the malcontent known as JT Miller. They're already lined up against the cap for next season! The perfect reasoning to ship off Bo Horvat because you can't afford him. He got his jabs in over time. I don't exaggerate that this year may go down as darker than 1997. That's a statement not made lightly. With everything that's occurred with how ass-backwards priorities are, if not worse, it's close. The New Orleans Saints of the hockey world merely reinforced it with a further gradual decline to the abyss. At first, we figured they'd only get better. They were on the fringes, but they were without Tom Wilson, Nick Backstrom, and John Carlson for long stretches. Ovi was gone from the team for a few weeks for crying out loud. Which is why it makes perfect sense for this team to implode once everyone returned. The Caps made the right move in selling at the deadline. They've accepted they can't go deep with this core anymore and are starting to shed off non-essential parts. Dmitry Orlov was shipped off, and this will probably include Kuznetsov in the offseason. Peter Laviolette couldn't muster water from this rock and is off to the head coach recycling bin. Hey, that sell-off got them Rasmus Sandin from an incredibly desperate Toronto, so there's a chance to bounce back. Sorry, but the troll in me has to say it. Congratulations, your team still can't make it past the first. It's just depressing at this point.
Zaka at the point. He was moving toward the middle. Marchand thought he would stay along the boards. Allmark turned it over. Bouncing puck. They score! Matthew Tkachuk wins it in overtime.